minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5.
That's one small step for man.
One eyewitness, one major pop cultural event. You Had to Be There uncovers stories that shed light on our most iconic moments.
Like the real enemy.
Each episode, our host, Julia Thompson, takes on the task of finding and interviewing one person within 48 hours who was there, with no idea what their event will be. Come along for the ride.
Your assignment for this episode of You Had to Be There is to find someone who was in attendance when Dee Snider of Twisted Sister, Frank Zappa, and John Denver testified before the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee about the subject of their lyrics for Congress and the PMRC in 1985. Starting now, you have 48 hours to find someone who was there and interview them. The PMRC was the Parents Music Resource Center. I believe it was led by Tipper Gore, which was Senator Al Gore's wife, later the vice president's wife, Tipper Gore. And it led to interesting journey of how we got parental guidance on CDs in music and censorship, but also the unknown, unforeseen consequences of what happens when you put a label on every CD across the country with anything suggestive. Well, kids might want it more.
My name is Julia Thompson, and I'm the host of You Had to Be There. When I was a kid, I only really became aware of explicit lyric stickers in the 90s when hip-hop was the main target for censorship. So this assignment, this podcast, I suppose is going to answer the question, how did we end up with these sexy stickers in the first place? The Parents Music Resource Center was founded by 4 women known as the Washington Wives. It was a bipartisan effort led by Tipper Gore. Their whole thing was trying to protect kids from quote-unquote porn rock. The committee came up with this list of songs called the Filthy 15 that supposedly represented this so-called porn content, music with violence and sex and Satanism and not fit for children's ears. They hoped to do so by slapping rating stickers on CDs. Frank Zappa, Dee Snider of Twisted Sister, and John Denver testified in opposition to the proposed warning labels. They called it censorship. So the actual hearing was a media circus. I mean, think about it. Dee Snider presenting to Congress? I watched the full hearing, and I must say, even as a C-SPAN piece, it was thoroughly entertaining. Not quite as good as the OJ trials, but something in that vein. Sorry to sound crass here. I am a child of the 90s, so this and Jenny Jones were primetime TV for my little brain. After watching it, I was eager to talk to someone who was in the audience, or wait, in attendance at the hearing. I did find someone, quickly. I liked his vibe in the video, so I really went for it, getting in touch with him, Facebook, website, white pages, etc. I spoke to him one day after I received my assignment. Here he is.
Hi, I'm Larry Stein. I'm Stanton Larry Stein, actually. Known by Larry Stein. I'm an attorney who represents artists in music, film, and television. In 1985, I was Frank Zappa's lawyer and appeared with Frank at the PMRC hearings before the U.S. Senate.
Do you have any vivid memories at all of that day or leading up to that day? Where we were staying, what the scene was like? Because it seemed sort of like a circus, like a media circus.
It was.
Could you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, the frenzy about this thing was unbelievable. I guess part of it was because you had these superstars testifying. But Frank had brought Moon Unit and Dweezil, his 2 children, along with us. And we took it very seriously. We didn't approach it as a media circus. We came prepared to make a presentation. We didn't want to turn it into a circus. We wanted to address the issue because we felt it was a very serious issue. And the way in which we approached it would have a lot to do with the credibility of our presentation.
So how did this bubble up? Like, how did he get involved? Did they invite him?
Yes, they did invite him. This was a bunch of wives of senators and powerful people. And there were 2 things going on at that time. The RIAA was really trying to appease Congress because there was this blank tape issue where they didn't want people getting blank tapes and copying stuff, and financial aspect to this. And so they really wanted to kowtow to Congress. And this was getting a lot of momentum through the PMRC.
Okay, so this blank tape thing. It took me like 3 people explaining it to me to really understand it. I just had to put my brain in a time machine, back to the days of analog. The Recording Industry Association of America, RIAA, was proposing a bill that would impose taxes on blank tapes and license fees on home recording to combat music piracy. The RIAA said the taxes would go to record labels and their artists, but the artists didn't really believe it. Most people agree the recording industry planned to give in to demands for record labeling so it could get its home taping legislation through Congress. So yeah, that's the blank tape thing. And no, it never came into fruition. Back to Zappa's lawyer, Larry.
Frank spoke out against it because he was politically very savvy and he saw where it was going, and he spoke out about it. And I think that's one of the reasons why they wanted to have him there. And they didn't expect to get what they got, which was a very rational individual who had well reasoned the situation and understood it and was trying to get at the core of it.
The next witness will be Mr. Frank Zappa. Mr. Zappa, thank you very much for being with us. Please proceed.
Okay, my name is Frank Zappa. This is my attorney, Larry Stein, from Los Angeles. Can you hear me?
If you could speak very directly and clearly into the microphone, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, my name is Frank Zappa. This is my attorney, Larry Stein. The statement that I prepared that I sent you 100 copies of is 5 pages long, so I have shortened it down, and I'm going to read a condensed version of it. Certain things have happened. I've been listening to the event in the other room, and I've heard some conflicting reports as to whether or not people in this committee want legislation. I understand that Mr. Hollings does from his comments. Is that correct?
I think you better concentrate on your testimony rather than asking questions of the committee.
The reason I need to ask it because I have to change something in my testimony if there is not a clear-cut version of whether or not legislation is what is being discussed here.
So, do the best you can, because I don't think anybody here can characterize Senator Hollings' position.
Okay. Well, I'll carry on with the issue then.
I think the whole point was to get a couple of crazy rock and roll people there like Dee Snider and Frank Zappa and have them go off. And I think they were very surprised when Frank came in wearing a suit and a tie with his hair neatly cut and was extremely articulate and gave a presentation which was very rational. He couldn't help himself. He had to occasionally take a shot at them like, dealing with this problem the way the PMRC is doing it is like beheading someone because of a dandruff problem, that sort of thing that he had to do. But he was very rational and he provided an alternative to what they wanted to do, because what he was really opposed to is somebody else in some little room somewhere deciding what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. And so we came up with the concept of, if you really want to give the parents the information they need, then simply provide the lyrics to them, let them look at them themselves, and let the parents make the decision. But let's not have some third party or some governmental or private company making decisions as to what someone should see or hear or listen to.
I watched it, and one thing I was fascinated by was the distinction between film versus music.
There's an easy solution because they're different. You cannot, in any fashion, let a parent know everything that's in a film, okay? It just doesn't work. But lyrics to songs are very simple to put out there, and then the parent can make the decision rather than some third party about whether it's appropriate or not for their child.
I've done a number of interviews on television, and people keep saying, can't you take a few steps in their direction? Can't you sympathize? Can't you empathize? I do more than that at this point. I've got an idea for a way to stop all this stuff and a way to give parents what they really want, which is information, accurate information as to what is inside the album without providing a stigma for the musicians who have played on the album or the people who sing it or the people who wrote it. And I think that if you listen carefully to this idea, that it might just get by all the constitutional problems and everything else as far as I'm concerned. I have no objection to having all of the lyrics placed on the album routinely all the time. But there is a little problem. Record companies do not own the right automatically to take these lyrics because they're owned by publishing companies. So just as all the rest of the PMRC proposals would cost money, this would cost money too, because the record companies would need, they shouldn't be forced to bear the cost of the extra expenditure to the publisher to print those lyrics. If you consider that the public needs to be warned about the contents of the records, what better way than to let them see exactly what the songs say? That way you don't have to put any kind of subjective rating on the record. You don't have to call it R, X, D, A, anything. You can read it for yourself. But in order for it to work properly, the lyrics should be on a uniform kind of a sheet. Maybe even the government could print those sheets. And maybe it should even be paid for by the government if the government is interested in making sure that people have consumer information in this regard. And you also have to realize that if a person buys the record and takes it out of the store, once it's out of the store, you can't return it if you read the lyrics at home and decide that little Johnny is not supposed to have it. I think that that should at least be considered, and the idea of imposing these ratings on live concerts, on the albums, asking record companies to reevaluate or drop or violate contracts that they already have with artists should be thrown out. And that's it all. That's all I have to say.
We may disagree as to what's appropriate, but at least the parent is making the decision, not the government or some independent third party. And as Frank said, there's a very big difference between someone acting in a movie because you know it's not their words. Actors don't write the script, so they're playing a role. But when an artist creates music, and especially if they're a writer, a producer, artist, it's them, it's their words. And so, like Frank was saying, when you put a label on someone, you're labeling them. When you label their music, you're labeling them. You're not labeling a movie where there are all kinds of producers and directors and actors and writers and all kinds of you. So it's a much more direct thing, and it's a much easier solution in the music field than it is in television or film. So that's what we were trying to point out to them. There's a much, what Frank said when he first started was, his understanding of the First Amendment is you find the least objectionable method of restraint. And so we were showing them there's a very simple alternative because we knew what they were trying to do. For them to say that we're just having this hearing, but we're not considering regulations and we're not considering legislation or anything else. We knew what they were doing. We knew it was the preface to more action by the government by way of censorship. I spent a lot of time working with Frank. Constitutional laws was my specialty in law school. So we were totally prepared. When that one senator, Slade was his first name, when he said, you don't know the first thing about First Amendment. Frank could have taught them a lesson on First Amendment because we went over all of the issues and all of the cases and all of the legal aspects to First Amendment law before he ever walked into those chambers. So we saw clearly what was coming, and we were anticipating it and trying to be honest about what they were doing, and they were hiding behind the fact that it was just a hearing and not no proposed legislation or regulations. But some of them admitted finally that's what they had in mind, and that's what we wanted to get out of them, because before that there have been real denials about what the purpose was.
Yeah, that confused me a lot, actually, even in watching it. Like, what were the motivations? Like, what were they hoping to achieve? Why were they unable to achieve that in layman's terms?
They wanted to control music and the artists that create the music. That was their ultimate goal. It was a censorship goal. There's no question about it. They used children as a basis for making it more of a moral issue, which it was more acceptable to some portions of the public. But their whole goal was, if they could have, they would have passed legislation which would have been incredibly restrictive and censored artists. So we saw very clearly where they were going, even though they were denying it. And that's why Frank started out the very first thing he said was, my comments will be different depending upon whether you are doing this because of anticipated legislation or regulation, or whether you are just doing this because of an interest in the issue and allowing the public more information about it. If it was informational, it was one thing. If it was a precursor to either legislation or regulation, then he wanted to be more specific about how negative that would be.
So then what was the outcome?
Well, there was some, ultimately, there was some labeling, and actually more people, what we find kind of in the film industry as well, is sometimes when you label something and you tell people they can't see it, they want to see it more. It's sort of like alcohol, the more you try and prohibit it, the more attractive it becomes to people.
So what ended up happening with your proposal? Did you follow up with the record companies, or did that committee follow up with the record companies?
No, it never really went anywhere.
Do you think that was because it was too expensive?
Their goal really was not to give parents the information necessary to make the decision. Their goal was to be able to say negative things about certain artists or certain works so that they would hopefully turn the public and the record companies against those artists, so that those artists wouldn't have the ability to put out the material that they wanted. That was their ultimate goal. I don't believe for a second they were really concerned about protecting children from the lyrics, because there were easier ways of doing that, and that's something that every parent could do.
So as mentioned, Dee Snider was there. The Dee Snider who was the lead singer of Twisted Sister, who sang songs such as We're Not Gonna Take It and I Wanna Rock. He was a classic 80s metal guy with long flowing hair, tight clothes, and tons of makeup. Many people say that Dee's testimony at the hearing was compelling and thoughtful. No, he didn't wear a suit and tie, and he pulled a folded up piece of paper that was his statement out of his back jean pocket. But he was extremely articulate. Likely another shock to the committee. I wanted a hot take from his perspective, and was able to get in touch with a Dee Snider insider.
So my name's Mark Weiss. Also got a nickname called Weiss Guy, which there's a couple stories on that one. But yeah, so it's Mark Weiss, and I'm a photographer. Started in 1974 was my first concert 50 years ago on Thanksgiving when Elton John played Madison Square Garden. I get a call from the record company, Atlantic, and saying we want you to do the new album from Twisted Sister called Stay Hungry. And I'm like, I just yes to everything. I said, yeah, I can do it. Let's do it. I'll build a set in my studio and we'll make it happen. Well, we did the shoot, and it ended up being a very iconic photograph. And the success of that, we became fast friends, and I was at all the video shoots. They did all the publicity, and I was pretty much Dee's right-hand man as a photographer. He wanted control in everything, especially imagery.
So were you at the PMCR hearing on September 19th, 1985?
Yes. So leading up to the PMRC was the next album, which was Come Out and Play. And we were just finishing up doing the album cover, which was Dee coming out of a street and everything. So we were just like really enthralled in all the imagery for that album cover. And so me and Dee were pretty tight then. as tight as we ever could be because it was all about image. And he wanted this pop-up cover with this elaborate inner sleeve with half makeup, half not makeup. And so then when he got the call to go to the PMRC, he called me up. He said, "Hey, Mark, he told me about it. He goes, 'You want to come with me?' I went with him on the plane with Joe Gerber, who's like on his right-hand man at the time. And we went. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I didn't know I was going to be a fish out of water with all the other photographers because I was like the one guy. I had long hair, and it was just pretty surreal seeing all the senators there and the wives and just the production. And then to see Frank Zappa and John Denver and their lawyers, it was like the real deal. And then Dee comes in with his T-shirt, and he's just kind of came in and had his tight jeans on with his notes in his back pocket all folded up like he was in school. And he sat down like he owned the place and just started putting everyone in their place pretty much.
Mr. Snider, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me here. I don't know if it's morning or afternoon. I'll say both. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Dee Snider. That's Snider. I have been asked to come here to present my views on, quote, the subject of the content of certain sound recordings and suggestions that recording packages be labeled to provide a warning to prospective purchasers of sexually explicit or other potentially offensive content, unquote. Before I get into that, I'd like to tell the committee a little bit about myself. I'm 30 years old. I'm married. I have a 3-year-old son. I was born and raised a Christian, and I still adhere to those principles. Believe it or not, I do not drink, I do not smoke, and I do not do drugs. I do play in and write the songs for a rock and roll band named Twisted Sister that is classified as heavy metal. And I pride myself on writing songs that are consistent with my above-mentioned beliefs. There are many facets to this complex issue, and time does not permit me to address all of them. However, my feelings are expressed for the most part by the August 8th, 1985 letter to the Parents Music Resource Center from Mr. Stanley Gordikoff, President of the Recording Industry Association of America. This letter was a formal response to the PMRC's petition of the RIAA. The only part of this document I do not support is Mr. Gordikoff's unnecessary and unfortunate decision to agree to a so-called generic label on some selected records. In my opinion, this should be retracted.
I was surprised at Al Gore's reaction to Dee. Like, he was very condescending.
Yeah, exactly. That's the good word for it, for sure.
Senator Gore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, are you going to tell me you're a big fan of my music as well?
No, I'm not. I'm not a fan of your music.
I'm sorry, Mr. Gore.
I'm aware that Frank Zappa and John Denver cover quite a spectrum, and I do enjoy them both. I am not, however, a fan of Twisted Sister, and I will readily say that. Mr. Snider, what is the name of your fan club?
The fan club is called the SMF Friends of Twisted Sister.
And what does SMF stand for when it's spelled out?
It stands for the Sick Motherfucking Friends of Twisted Sister.
Is this also a Christian group?
I don't believe that profanity has anything to do with Christianity.
What else do you remember from that day?
Well, before that, we went to, I said, let's do some photographs. I'm not sure it was before or after. It was probably after. But we went around by the White House and we took some photos in front. He made his own shirt and it said censored. And his father was there. I remember his father being at the hotel and Dee being really like, see, Dad, like your son's is doing something here, doing something good. So I know Dee was very ecstatic about having his dad there, having him seeing his son like make something of himself, standing up to Congress or to the housewives, because Dee was always a fighter, and his parents didn't. I don't think his parents always really believed in his vision, like a lot of people didn't. But Dee was pretty confident, ever from the beginning. He fought until he got what he wanted, And that day, I remember just kind of hanging out with his father, taking some photos, reflecting outside, right before we were coming walk over to where we did the event. And before that, we went to a press conference where Dee would take questions, and I would document that as well.
Do you remember where you were in the room, like for the actual hearing in relationship to where he was sitting?
Actually, before it all went down, it was me, Dee, and Frank were in the back room, one of the senators' rooms, and we were going through their drawers. Like it was like we were sitting there, we were like pulling stuff out and looking at, taking pictures, and we did a lot of photos right before we went out, and then when Dee walked out, I walked out and planted myself in. I guess it was right where all the photographers were, right in the middle. I think it was between Dee and the senators, and you could see me in some clips too. I'm in clips. You can see me standing up a little bit, like walking in.
And Dee just wanted you there. That was kind of the vibe.
He knew that the power of publicity and the power of a photograph, and wanted me to document that, as no one would.
I'm looking at your album cover right now for Stay Hungry. It's so good.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, actually, I have on their 25th anniversary, they had a record signing over in New York City. And there was a big, I'm looking at it right now, it's about 4 feet by 4 feet of Dee with the picture. And I had him sign it, and I'm reading it now. It says, White Sky. What does it say? Let me see it. Read it here. White Sky. We rocked the world with this photo. Dee Snider. And then the whole band signed it.
Where is it hanging up?
It's just right by my gold records, above my Come Out and Play album package, because I art directed that one as well. So I kept all the mummy wrapping and the fingernails and all that.
That's really cool. I spoke to two really interesting people, photographer Mark Weiss and lawyer Larry Stein. Somehow, I still didn't feel like I had a handle on the event, or at the least, the societal implications of the label hearing on pop music. Rap, hip-hop, censorship was such a huge deal in my generation, and I really wanted to understand how this all connected. I decided to call up an expert.
Well, I'm Chuck Eddy, and I've been writing about music for close to half a century now, since about 45 years, for Village Voice and Cream Magazine and all sorts of other outlets. And I've written 4 books. The first one was about metal, Stairway to Hell, the 500 greatest heavy metal albums in the universe. The most recent one was called Terminated for Reasons of Taste. That was a couple years ago, and it was a collection of my writing.
Let's talk about this hearing and censorship and...
Okay. I hadn't given it thought in years. My wife is actually working on a graphic novel about being a teenager in the 80s, and so she had actually thought about it more than me. We looked up the list of the Filthy 15, which is the songs that they used as examples during the hearings of that were offensive for minors. Their whole idea was to try to get parental advisory stickers or to place other limits on possibly put lyrics on album covers and things like that. But anyway, looking over the list, it's kind of fascinating. And I don't know whether you've looked at it yourself. I mean, there's songs by pretty well-known artists, Prince and Madonna and Cyndi Lauper, and lesser known or forgotten artists. Vanity Six, which was a Prince side project, one of the girl groups that he put together. A metal band called Merciful Fate, another metal band called Venom that people just don't talk about that much anymore. And they signal out the songs for reasons of sex, violence, drug and alcohol use. And if you look up the list, it says how they tagged the songs. And one thing we noticed, and my wife actually this morning, she was nice enough, she went running and she listened to the playlist that was on Spotify. Actually, I think 14 of 15 songs. And she texted me. She's like, a lot of these are about female sexual agency. That's really weird. And it is kind of true. There's like 2 masturbation songs. One is Cyndi Lauper, And the other one is Prince's Darling Nikki, which is about a woman. There's a Sheena Easton song. It's amazing to me that Sheena Easton was on the list. She was a middle of the road pop singer. She did this song called Sugar Walls, which was about a certain part of her body, written by Prince, and that earned her a place in the Filthy 15. So I was struck even before my wife said that. I'm like, there's 2 masturbation songs on the list, and they're both about women masturbating. Believe me, I can name 20 or 30 songs about guys masturbating. They're out there. And it seems really kind of strange that they, that they zeroed in on these 2 songs. And I almost wonder, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to, judge Kipper's psychology, but there's something kind of odd about it.
Yeah.
Def Leppard, who were pretty innocuous hair metal band, as they were called then, are on the list basically for a drinking song. I mean, it says drug and alcohol use, but it was about drinking. A song called High and Dry. What's interesting to me is if you're going to put drinking songs on the list, you might want to include a couple country songs, because country's kind of known for songs about getting whiskey bent and hellbound, which is, I mean, it's actually, Hank Williams Jr. song, you could get whiskey and hell on the same song, but there are no country songs on the list. And country obviously had violent songs going back, a good half century before that. I mean, there's always been country murder songs or country suicide songs or songs where, people drown their girlfriend or whatever. There's one, Judas Priest Eat Me Alive, which is probably about gay sex, although I don't know to what extent people knew about Rob Halford at the time. And there's a couple that they mark as a cult, the Venom song, the Merciful Fate song. And that's pretty interesting, because what I realized is that some of this, there's a connection to, in the early 80s, there were these, this kind of satanic panic at daycare centers. This family called the McMasters ran a daycare center in Los Angeles and were sued by, I think, the Los Angeles County, if I remember right. But the daycare center panic was part of a whole kind of backlash, I think, that started really in the 70s, where people being upset about movies like The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby, through the whole Dungeons and Dragons thing. There was supposed to be like this satanic thread running through all this stuff. And again, the daycare center thing, which was interesting, because I think one of the problems that people have with daycare centers is it was sort of this disruption of the nuclear family, the idea that women were working outside of home and putting their little kids in these daycare centers, and people went to jail for years, for this hope, basically this hope. So it just seems like there's a lot of different angles that you could go with this. But there's other interesting things. The 3 artists who testified at the hearings were Frank Zappa, Dee Snider, who was a singer for Twisted Sister, whose own song "We're Gonna Take It" was one of the top 15, supposedly for violence. Although we were trying to figure out, that's not a violent song. It's kind of a rebellion song. And so I had a conversation with my wife. Why did they list that? And she's like, probably the video. And sure enough, the 2 videos that were shown during the hearings were Twisted Sisters, "We're Not Gonna Take It," and Van Halen's "Hot for Teacher," both of which are basically cartoons. I mean, they're not. It's amazing to me that anybody would think that these were frightening songs, because the cartoons, I mean, they're like kids rebelling, or a kid who has a crush on his teacher or whatever, and they're silly. They're like Dee Snider and David Lee Roth were basically clowns, and it's just funny that those were the examples that were used. But another song that I guess they were up in arms about was a song called I believe it's "Under the Blade."
Yeah,
which they said was about sadomasochism and dismemberment, and he's like, I wrote that song when I was about to go get surgery, because I was scared of getting surgery. And he said, yeah, if you go looking for sadomasochism, you're going to find it. If you go looking for lyrics about surgery, you're going to find it in the same song.
So Dee Snider was actually writing the song about one of his bandmates, not himself. But here's a clip from the hearing.
Since I seem to be the only person addressing this committee today who has been a direct target of accusations from the presumably responsible PMRC, I would like to use this occasion to speak on a more personal note and show just how unfair the whole concept of lyrical interpretation and judgment can be, and how many times this can amount to little more than character assassination. I have taken the liberty of distributing to you material and lyrics pertaining to these accusations. There were 3 attacks in particular which I would like to address. Accusation number 1. This attack was contained in an article written by Tipper Gore, which was given the form of a full page in my hometown newspaper on Long Island. In this article, Ms. Gore claimed that one of my songs, Under the Blade, had lyrics encouraging sadomasochism, bondage, and rape. The lyrics she quoted have absolutely nothing to do with these topics. On the contrary, the words in question are about surgery and the fear that it instills in people. Furthermore, the reader of this article is led to believe that the 3 lines she quotes go together in the song, when, as you can see from reading the lyrics, the first 2 lines she cites are an edited phrase from the 2nd verse, and the 3rd line is a misquote of a line from the chorus. That the writer could misquote me is curious, since we make it a point to print all our lyrics on the inner sleeve of every album. As the creator of Under the Blade, I can say categorically that the only sadomasochism, bondage, and rape in this song is in the mind of Ms. Gore.
Within a couple years after the hearings, I mean, basically, I don't know what came out of the hearings, as far as I can tell. The only thing that really came out of it is in 1987, the Recording Industry Association of America, RIAA, started putting parental advisory stickers on certain albums that had swear words or sexual depictions, or these other things that the PMRC was upset about. But it was kind of a cause then. Within a few years, music, if anything, got to a point where it made most of the songs on the list seem almost quaint in retrospect. Gangster rap, starting with Schoolie D and of course NWA, kind of kicked off around 1986, 1987, at least on record. Metal subgenres like death metal, which was basically songs about death, and black metal, which was kind of songs about hell and the devil, barely existed when the PMRC had its hearings. Although, to their credit, the two of the metal bands they list, Venom and Merciful Fate, were on the cutting edge of those music. So they were fairly obscure to the mainstream world. So I have to commend them for actually knowing Merciful Fate and Venom. My wife texted me, she's listening to it. She's like, I kind of like Merciful Fate. And she had never heard him before. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard a few songs by them too. They're kind of catchy. Because I never listened to them at the time. But metal got more and more, what's called extreme, what metal people call it extreme. Within a few years, I mean, there were controversies like the sale of 2 Live Crew records, which I think is around 1990. As Nasty as We Want to Be, selling it. Somebody was arrested, I think, a store in Florida, if I'm remembering this right. And there was a big controversy with Ice-T's Cop Killer, which was his band Body Count, who were actually kind of a merger of metal and rap. Another band that merged metal and rap the year after the PMRC hearings was the Beastie Boys. And I mean, I almost feel like, they should have waited a couple more years because they would have had better material. but it happened when it happened.
So you have gangster rap, and then you also have metal rap, right? I guess those were the two.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the Beastie Boys, who again, I mean, they were a cartoon in a way, in the same way that David Lee Roth or Twisted Sister were cartoons, but it was about rebellion. And the thing is, they were specifically, consciously mixing the two sounds, as were Run DMC when they got together with Aerosmith. I have connections to both of those. I mean, in 1987, early 1986, I interviewed Beastie Boys in Los Angeles, and they broke into my hotel room and videotaped it and released it as part of a video. I wrote an article for the Village Voice, and also in early 1986, saying Aerosmith's Walk This Way was a rap song before rap existed. Rick Rubin read the article. It gave him the idea to get Run DMC together with Aerosmith. So I'm partly the reason. It's partly my fault that metal and rap ended up
Well, thank you.
Having it's all my fault.
I'm really happy about that combination.
I mean, that got really bad. I mean, eventually, so Kid Rock, Rage Against the Machine, Limp Bizkit, all my fault. but
well, I would say you're good for half.
I mean, but at first it seemed like it was a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
But it was these two rebellious teenage musics, that were joining, and Public Enemy, who had metal samples on their albums. First album had I think a guitar sample from the guy in Slayer. First or second album, I forget. But and they were like more. I mean, they basically were critical race theory in musical form. But Public Enemy weren't what. I don't think that they ended up being as controversial as Two Live Crew and Ice-T did. I mean, sometimes I think it's just random, what ends up upsetting people. But with it, right, by the time you were 10 years old, it was. I mean, people in a way weren't really even talking about metal anymore.
Well, I think part of it also has to do with the fact that record labels, it was such a monolith at that time. So whatever music was popular, that's what everybody was hearing. Whereas now you can kind of listen to so many different things. Then we had such little access,
That is true. Yeah, you're right. It's like everybody listens to different stuff. I mean, there's like, as many platforms as there are teenagers, whereas MTV was suddenly this one thing, that you could turn it on for a couple hours and you could have a few of these, jot down a few of these songs.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many of them were actual big hits. I actually think it's what I find kind of the goofiest thing is Cyndi Lauper being on here.
Yeah.
With She Bop. I'm just like, Cyndi Lauper, come on. Who didn't love Cyndi Lauper?
And if only Tipper had a conversation with her daughter about it, how much better everyone would be.
I know.
So I suppose my favorite part of this conversation with Chuck Eddy is just truly how all over the place we go. I remember as I was recording it, I was like, what am I going to do with this? I need to call up another expert to clear everything up for me. I can't use this. What did the PMRC do other than slap some stickers on albums? Chuck is giving me anecdotes and possibilities. But what about the hard truth? So, honestly, I did get my answer-ish, answer light, maybe slightly more conclusive thoughts from this kind academic living in Iowa by the name of Kembrew McLeod. Here's an excerpt from our interview.
One of the most well-known stories from the PMRC, Tipper Gore, who was one of the founders of that organization, walked in and her daughter supposedly listening to Prince's Purple Rain, which was one of the biggest hits of the 1984. And one of those songs is Darling Nikki, which alludes to or is about, a woman masturbating, basically. Or at least that's a passing reference in the song. And so she was shocked. And that example was used as one of the many examples, along with heavy metal songs, of how something needs to happen within the music industry to protect the kids, protect the children. And so the PMRC basically organized a bunch of hearings to look into, what's going on in music. That led to the music industry by the end of the 1980s and early 1990s to adopt basically a private form of self-censorship rather than it being government intervening, which is a First Amendment issue. But when businesses, basically deal with controversies, internally and like within, their own business practices, yes, that is a kind of First Amendment issue because they're kind of bowing to, the potential that the government would step in and regulate them. And so instead, the record companies instead self-regulated because of that, the pressures put on them in part by those PMRC hearings that began in 1985. Soon after the PMRC hearings, you have rappers starting to get targeted, like the Two Live Crew with these Miami rappers who, basically marketed themselves as foul-mouthed rappers. And at the time, they did not have, parental warnings on records. And so basically that led to, record companies slapping those familiar stickers, parental advisory, on albums, rap albums, heavy metal albums that contain like a quote unquote objectionable subject matter.
Ultimately, the PMRC had a huge amount of continued influence on the record industry going all the way through the 90s. So the Ice-T song Cop Killer and Ice-T being kicked off his label had a lot to do with pressure on Time Warner from the PMRC. So they didn't really go away. They had a huge influence on what music was being made and how it was being censored. So the stakes only got higher for artists and record labels. Does this clarify things? Well, if it doesn't for you, it does for me. I was also thinking, why do we listen to podcasts? Do we want one kind of answer, a conclusion, or do we want to listen to smart, engaging people talk about cool things? I think I mostly veer towards the latter. So in this case, I've decided to include part of my interview with Chuck that pretty much has nothing to do with the PMRC, but it's just a really good story. Here we go. So question on the Beastie Boys thing. So you interviewed them. Do you mind telling that story before we hang up?
No, I don't mind at all. Their album came out toward the tail end of 1986. I'm talking about License to Ill, their first full-length album. I had been listening to them for a little while then because I had heard the singles. They put out a single called Rock Hard in 1985 that took a riff from an AC/DC song. It never ended up on any of the albums. I think the B-side used a Led Zeppelin riff. So, I mean, the idea was out there, to merge these musics. But they put out License to Ill in the tail end of 1986. In 1987, I had been writing for a magazine from Detroit called Cream Magazine, which was one of the great rock magazines. They flew me out to Los Angeles. I mean, I understood, what the Beastie Boys were doing right away. I mean, I was pretty in tune with both rap music and metal. And the idea of merging it, I mean, I was like, this is going to be the ultimate teenage music. I really believed that, because I mean, this is going to be like teenage rebellion music incarnate. So I did one of their first national interviews. It was a cover story. It's easy to find online. I interviewed them before they went on the Joan Rivers show. And they did like a short set on her show, had, I think, girls dancing in cages. They presented her a vibrator, I think, as a, parting gift or whatever. They were just doing their thing, which a couple of years later, they would kind of disown. They became almost like Zen Buddhists or whatever. And I mean, and became feminists in a lot of ways. I mean, one of them ended up marrying Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill, who pretty much invented Riot Girl. But at any rate, I did the interview with them. I asked them some questions that annoyed them, and we kind of annoyed each other back and forth. But I got a pretty great interview out of it. I was going to fly back to Detroit the next morning. I think it was 3 or 4 in the morning, and I actually wrote the exact time off my alarm clock in the lead to the piece. I think it was like 2:56. I don't know, whatever it was, or the wee hours in the morning. They got the key to my hotel room from the hotel staff. They said I was part of their entourage. They broke into my room. I'm sound asleep. They broke into my room, dumped water on me, and videotaped it. And it woke me up, and I was like, what? And I put chairs in front of the door, went back to sleep on the dry side of the bed. Got a couple more hours of sleep. Got back up and flew back to Detroit. And I realized, well, I know how I'm going to start my story now. But they were little assholes. They were like 19-year-old rich kids from New York, and not from the bad parts of New York. I think they had gone to. I think they all went to private schools. But anyway, they were privileged middle kids, and they were teenagers, and they were 3 teenagers, who suddenly were worldwide, famous stars, millions of dollars have fallen into their pockets, and they're gonna, take this ride for whatever it's worth. And I totally got that. I remember being in a limousine with them where they told the limo driver that they wanted to drive instead. So they left the limo driver at the hotel, and I'm sitting in the back seat, fearing for my life. Well, they're like, racing through the streets of LA. I can't remember which one was driving. But anyway, eventually I didn't know they videotaped it. All I knew is that they dumped water on me. Sometime in the next year, a VHS tape came out with a few of their music videos, and in between two of the videos was the video of me in the hotel getting water dumped on me. And if you go to YouTube and you search, I think it's Beastie Boys home movie, it's up there.
How did that make you feel?
Honestly, I felt that I should get a cut of the video.
Did you?
No. I tried, and I'm going to leave it there. My lawyer wasn't that great, but I wanted a cut of the video. I'm like, they're going to make money off of me, you know. I deserve to get paid for it. But
totally.
I mean, it was like I said, I had my lead. It was like, it startled me. It totally fit with what they were doing, you know. And it's something I can tell, you know, my grandkids.
I check in with Webb about my findings. It turns out that the committee actually had kind of a hold on Washington all the way up into the 90s. So their influence kind of pressurized the record industry because they needed to kind of stay in good relationships with the government. But that first hearing kind of felt, I don't know, in my opinion, I'm curious to hear what you have to say, but felt somewhat random.
Yeah, it felt like Tipper Gore and her cohort of Washington wives essentially turned on MTV. And for the first time, we're seeing the artistic representation of what the music meant. Perhaps they never actually read the lyrics to the songs or internalized it themselves. But when they saw it, it kind of like flipped a switch and said, we can't have this, quote, like filth on television, you know. And part of the reason I wanted to do this episode is, one, I just wanted to like understand like how did this really happen. But I'm fascinated by unintended consequences, especially when it comes to government overreach and meddling with free speech, especially when it comes to popular culture. And if you ask the record industry, do you want a label on CDs that say that there is explicit words in this? They're going to say, of course, no. You know, you're censoring our words. But, you know, the unintended consequences of that is a teenager sees the CD, and which one do they want at the CD store in the 80s and 90s? The one that everyone says you cannot have or you should not have. The government doesn't want you to have this. You know, it is very much rage against the machine, you know, for lack of a better phrase. So it's really interesting. Like, how does this all like really happen?
Well, you probably know this from the hearing, but the reason John Denver was passionate about censorship from a personal perspective was because his song Rocky Mountain High was censored from certain radio stations.
Because of like allusions to marijuana?
Exactly. But he was saying it had nothing to do with that. So it's kind of funny, you know?
It's the visualization of this stuff or the reading between the lines or not. And
or the interpretation and misinterpretation of lyrics.
Yeah. You know, there's people that hear the melody first of a song, and then there's people who internalize the lyrics first. And until this very moment, never once in the 39 and a half years of my life have I ever thought that Rocky Mountain High was anything other than being about being high up in the Rocky Mountains. Not being high on drugs. It's, I guess that's what happens when the government meddles with art, I suppose.
I'm opposed as an artist. I'm opposed to any kind of a rating system, voluntary or otherwise. Putting the lyrics on the sleeve of an album or on the jacket of an album is no problem for me. Again, I think it goes beyond reading the word, and I bring up again the song Rocky Mountain High. You know, some people, high is high, and high is getting stoned, and high is a feeling of elation, a celebration in life. As I told the people in the Soviet Union when I had the privilege of singing for them there, I sang Rocky Mountain High, and then I described what high meant to me, and then I said to them, that's how I feel having the privilege of singing for you. That is how I feel having the opportunity to participate in my government here today.
Thank you, Mr. Denver. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pressler?
I guess that ties in with my question. Your basic line is that you're against any type of government action in this area, or indeed any voluntary labeling.
I would be, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience for waiting so long.
Thank you, Senator. Great privilege to be with you all.
Thank you.
You Had to Be There is a Hi Barr production, created by Hi Barr. All episodes written, edited, and hosted by Julia Thompson. Produced by Julia Thompson and Webb Barr. Additional editing, sound mix, and engineering by Vishal Nayak. Opening score by Teeny Lieberson. Artwork created by Dylan Lathrop. Special thanks to our parents, friends, and chosen family. And most importantly, thank you to the artists who have inspired us, because they had to do it.